Okay, so we're 2 weeks ago we were at Nun Dalid Amid Bays. We're still in the subject of trying to get our arms around the whole issue of whether or not a chomesh has kedusha, because we say, and Rabbi Shiur Balevi was the author of that brisa that said that only the kedusha rishon, meaning the actual underlying item that we're redeeming is kodesh. But once we redeem it with the chomesh no longer has kedusha. So we went back and forth on that as to whether or not um, how do we know and what's required to have kedusha. So that's kind of where we are we're going to hopefully complete that discussion this week and then move on. But what's interesting about the discussion is that, again, it's not halacha l'maisa today because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. So when we say things that are dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash, we know Masa Sheni has no issue of Masa Sheni, which is also told in the Beis Hamikdash, but Masa Sheni is excluded from the Chomish being Kodesh because of the verbiage. Remember, Chamosov, Chamishisov, and Chamishiso. So the language in the Torah is what dictates whether or not that the Chomish has Kedusha. So by Master Sheni for sure not, and by Hagdish yet, we were just wondering what the situation here is in our case. So we're going to try now to understand. So the last thing we said 2 weeks ago was that Rabbi Lazar was an exchange between Rabbi Lazar and the Tana of the Brisa, and we determined that there were two things that we said in a particular case by a behemoth tameya. A behemoth tameya can become kodesh if someone is makdish it. Now you can't sacrifice, you can't use it, but the value of that behemoth tameya can definitely be redeemed for kedusha. So it does have a role. So Rabbi Elazar said to the Tana that that we were talking about Me'ilah. So we were talking about, can you be Moab a Hagdish? And we said that it has to have two components. One component is that it has to have complete kedusha. In other words, it cannot be separately dedicated, which of course it has. And then the second point was that besides that, it required that there can be no secondary. In other words, we say it's kedusha, but it has to be a whole kedusha. So it has to be original kedusha, and then that it has to be a whole kedusha. What do we mean by that? So we say that if it's original kedusha, then it comes to exclude kachim kalim, which in other words, kachim kalim aren't can be used, so they're not a complete kedusha, right? So you can't have mila there. But as far as tchilas hagdish, meaning the original hagdish, the Gemara said that made that chilik between original hagdish and sof hagdish, meaning original hagdish is completely that has to be replaced with hagdish. But sof hagdish, meaning the derivative of that hagdish, which is the chomesh, does not have to be a kula hagdish. So that's how the Gemara left it there. Now we're going to start Amalei Ravash Ravina at the bottom of Nun Daled Amid Beis. So here the question is going to be that the Brisa says that that a behemoth tameya it has what we call tchilas hagdish. It has tchila kodesh. So this is going to be the question whether or not that's what the brisa means to say, that there is tchilas hagdish on a behema tameya, right? He's not saying that that's the case. So Amalei Ravina Ravashi, Amalei Ravashi Ravina. So Rav Ashi said to Ravina, behema tameya betchilas hagdish isa. He's asking the question, does a behemoth tameya have tchilas hegdish? Meaning, is it kodesh from the very beginning? Does it have tchilas hegdish? Be'emtza hegdish lesser, but it doesn't have intermediate hegdish. So what does that mean? It doesn't have intermediate hegdish. That means that that actually we have to break it down. There are three forms of hegdish: Tchilas hegdish, emtza hegdish, and sof hegdish. What does that mean? Tchilas hegdish means that the very beginning, you take a behemoth tamei and you say, I'm dedicating this for Kodesh. That's Tchilas hegdish. And we say you can do that because that behemoth doesn't have to be sacrificed. It can be redeemed for money that you can use for the Bedek Habayis. The question is, does it have emtza hegdish? What does emtza hegdish mean? That means if you're moel, if you somehow desanctify that original hegdish, then you have to replace it with a chomesh. That chomesh is what's known as emtza hegdish. It's the intermediate hegdish. So the Gemara is saying here, Ravina says to Rav Ashi, I understand. Do we say that behemoth tamei has tchilish hegdish and not emtza hegdish? Now, there's a concept called sof hegdish. Sof hegdish means the actual giving of a carbon. So by behemoth tamei, you can't give a carbon. There's no carbon by behemoth tamei. So by a kosher animal, you would say it has sof hegdish because you can bring a carbon, but you can't say that by a behemoth tamei. So therefore, it clearly doesn't have sof hegdish. The question is, does it have emtza hegdish? Does it have intermediate hegdish? So that was the question that Rav Ashi asked Ravina. Amalei, so Ravina said to him, the fisha ena b'sof hegdish. He wants to conclude, since it doesn't have sof hegdish, behemoth tamei, therefore it doesn't have emtza hegdish. In other words, he wants to learn that since you can't complete the hegdish cycle with a behemoth tamei, which is what the question here is, therefore it doesn't go beyond the initial kedusha. The initial kedusha was that I'm sanctifying this non-kosher animal, and therefore I have to redeem it. So Ravina says, you know what? Because you can't complete it with a carbon, I'm not going to allow, Ravina's saying, we're not going to allow any Kodesh derivatively, which means that the Chomesh is not Kodesh. The Chomesh that you have to give does not have any special sanctity itself. It can be just any item, doesn't have to be something that is Kodesh. That's what Ravina wants to take from this question, is that since you can't have sof hegdish, you can't have intervening hegdish. He doesn't really give a dedicated reason as to why you draw that analogy, but he's saying that it's clear that since you can't complete it, there should be nothing but the original. In other words, it's a svara here that he's saying that because you can't complete the hegdish by behemoth tamei, therefore there should be no kedusha beyond your original statement. And there is some validity to that, because if you make something kodesh that otherwise shouldn't be, like a behemoth tamei, or that you can't use, then the theory is that you've now isolated that kedusha to just what you said. I'm making this behemoth tamei kodesh, and therefore I'm obligated to when I want to make it chol, that I have to pay for it, and fine, and that can be dedicated to the Beis Hamikdash. But beyond that, why should there be any ramifications to that? So there's a seichel to that, even though he doesn't bring a specific proof. But the Gemara says not so fast. The Gemara questions Ravina's answer. Omalei Rav Acha Medifta Ravina. So Rav Acha Medifta said to Ravina, okay, be'emtza hegdish mia isa. Why do you say that? There is intermediate, meaning the chomesh. There is intermediate hegdish. Ulosof nami chomesh. What? So someone should add a fifth. That there should be a chomesh added when you redeem the chomesh. Remember, this is the question of whether you have to give a chomesh and a chomesh. So Ravina is saying you don't give a chomesh and a chomesh because the only kedusha is the original sanctification of the behemoth tamei, nothing else. So therefore, the chomesh has no kedusha, and if you don't pay the chomesh or there's some problem with it, you don't pay a chomesh and a chomesh. But Rav Acham Adifta is saying he disputes Ravina. He's saying no, intermediate hagdish, the chomesh itself has kedusha, right? It does have kedusha. Therefore, if you deconsecrate it, you have to give another chomesh. So so he disputes the point, and he's saying that a chomesh does have sanctity. So that's the machlokes here that we're bringing down between. So Rav Acham Adifta has a kasha on Ravina. Comes Ravina on Malay, so Ravina says no, that Harihu Besof Hakodesh, that again, he took the view that there is no intermediate. So he's saying again that intermediate is like Soph. Just like Soph doesn't have any Kedusha because you can't bring a carbon, he's saying Harihuk is Soph HaKodesh, that intermediate is like Soph Kodesh, Ma Soph Kodesh, and a Mosef Chomesh. Just like the Soph Kodesh, you don't add a Chomesh because you can't give a carbon. Af Emtza HaKodesh, then even Emtza, meaning the Chomesh itself, you don't add a fifth on the fifth when you redeem it from kedusha. So again, this machlokes, Ravina says he doesn't buy Rav Acham Adifta's point that a chomesh, that the chomesh, the intermediate, goes to the sof. He says it goes to the primary, and that's what the machlokes is where did Emtza land? Does it land on the side of the Tchilas Kodesh, or does it? And again, this is a seichel question. There doesn't seem to be a source in the Torah that should tell us that. So we're trying to glean from Svara what is the right approach, and that's the machlokes between Ravina and the others. So Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Acham Adifta, they all want to take the position that it follows through that a chomesh also has sanctity, and you have to give a chomesh and a chomesh. And Ravina is saying no, that's not the case. Okay, so that's where we are in that machlokes. Amalei Rav Zutra Bereid Rav Mori Ravina. So now comes Rav Zutra Bereid Mori and says to Ravina, Ma chozes the medamis leila sof hakodesh. Nedam l'tchilas hakodesh. In other words, he's asking him on his basic theory that it's compared to Sof Kodesh, which is why you don't give the Chomesh. What's your theory? I mean, why do you say that it's compared to the Sof? Let's compare it to primary Kodesh. Why? Because primary Kodesh it's kind of like, what do we start off with? We start off with primary Kodesh. So derivatively, we should say that any Kodesh from that should be Kodesh as well. So again, Al Pisvara, he's saying you started off with Kodesh, therefore the next line down should be Kodesh. Ravina doesn't say that. Ravina says no, that it doesn't. It doesn't lie because he's tying it to Sof Kodesh in the three layers. So this is the machlokes again. To try to understand the machlokes, we'll completely look at Rashi. Rashi gives us a little bit of an indication, but this is the back and forth now is whether or not this intermediate Emtza Kodesh, the Chomesh itself has Kedusha, so that when you have to redeem it, you redeem it with another Kodesh. Omalei, so Ravina answers back to Rav Zutra, Mistabra l'sofa Kodesh, Havalele Dmuye. No, that it al pi seichel, it should be compared to the Sof, not to the Tchila. Why? So he says, now this is the first glimmer of what he's saying, Shein nispas ministapes. Nispas minaspes. That this is okay. So this is a different svara. The svara says that when you okay, so how do you learn the laws of Kedusha? according to this interpretation. So he says you learn the laws of Kedusha from something else that has Kedusha. Okay, what does that mean? That the Sof Kodesh, the carbon, that's Kodesh. That's always Kodesh. There's no question about it. Now, you can't give it in the case of a Behemoth Tameya, but the Sof Kodesh has a permanent Kedusha to it because it's a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. Tchilas Kodesh, which in the case of a Behemoth Tameya you redeem, doesn't have, it doesn't have lasting Kedusha in and of itself. You can redeem it, but the Tchilas Kodesh doesn't have lasting Kedusha, right? So in contrast to Sof Kodesh, which is always Kodesh, Tchilas Kodesh is not always Kodesh. Says Ravina, you know what my theory is, why I say that it's like Sof Kodesh and not Tchilas Kodesh? The reason is because this Nisbas Ministayas knows this is the law of what we call the law of transference. The law, how do you transfer Kedusha? You transfer Kedusha to something that is Kodesh. So since Sof Kodesh always remains Kodesh, I'm saying that Emsa Kodesh should emulate it and not Tchilas Kodesh. Because if you emulate Tchilas Kodesh, then that itself is fleeting because you can redeem it.
It's variable. It's not steady.
It's variable. It's exactly. It's variable. It's not steady. Like
Right.
Sof Kodesh is always there because it's a carbon.
Right.
So I would like to compare Emtza to something that is permanent, not something that is variable. That's his seichel. So now we begin to understand Ravina Svara, why he says that a chomish on a chomish you don't redeem is because it's like Sof Kodesh, and Sof Kodesh you don't redeem. So that's kind of the indication here from Ravina why he says that. The other Mandi Omrim, those who oppose him, obviously, again, don't necessarily hold from that view, but that's his view. Says the Gemara, okay, if that's your view, that you go like Sof Kodesh because that's more likely to be how you want to compare it, then Adarabba, the Tchilas HaKodesh Havelin the Dmuyeh. Then the other Manda Amrim are right that it should be compared to Tchilas Kodesh. Why? Shekain Dava sheyesh achrav kedusha medava sheyesh achrav kedusha. Because if you want to go by transference, that's now your final indication, then you shouldn't go by Sof. You should go by Tchila. Why? Because just like a Dava Shebetchila, this animal, right? Is Kodesh, that he's saying the theory is Shekain Dover Sheyesh Achrav Kodesh, that something that follows Kedusha, where do you get it from? Midavar Sheyesh Achrav Kedusha. In other words, you follow the line that Kodesh follows Kodesh, right? So he says it should be from the original Kodesh because that's kind of where we start. We start from something that's Kodesh. And if you want to know what it spawns, then you should look at that thing and say, that's a Dava Kodesh, therefore something that emanates from it should be Kodesh. Now, there's a certain seichel to that if you have a Dava Shebekadusha, then something that derives from that Dava Shebekadusha should be Kodesh. Now, we're saying it's not because of because of Nisbayas, that it should go to something that is permanent. But the other Manda Amrim say no, that's not the seichel. The seichel is Kodesh should follow Kodesh. Yeah, Jay. I'm not hearing you.
You're muted.
Ah.
I wasn't raising my hand. I just.
I'm sorry. Okay. So in other words, the Manda Omrim that dispute Ravina's theory say Adarabba, Tchilas HaKodesh Havale Lidmuye, that it should be compared to Tchilas Kodesh because Kodesh spawns Kodesh. So now the question is how you view Kedusha. We have a clear contrast. According to Ravina, you tie it to something that has permanent Kodesh, which is Sof Kodesh, and Sof Kodesh doesn't have a Chomesh. Okay, I understand that. And the other Mandarim are saying, no, if something starts off as Kodesh, then the seichel is that what derives from that should also be kodesh. Again, it's a seichel thing. It's not. There's no pasuk. There's nothing that points to it. But they're saying that if you're already going by transference, then the transference makes more sense from the tchila than it does from the sof. So that's why they dispute on Ravina.
Rabbi, the question:
Yeah.
You donate a chamor, a
Yes.
behemoth, they have the choice. They could sell it, but they don't have to. The Hekdesh can keep it as a draft animal to pull wagons.
Correct.
So if they keep it and the chamor is now working in the temple precincts, it's Hekdesh. Does it have kedusha?
Yes.
You can't touch it anymore, right?
It's hagdish.
So it has kedusha.
Correct.
Which kind of kedusha is that?
You could touch it. You could if that's not like
I mean, it's not a davar kodesh like a carbon or something else, but
right.
but
So,
it's only
But you can't use it for a
You can't
use it
pull
for a
out
full
and start.
purpose.
You can't use it again, or you would be
right.
moel, right? It'd be moel if you
That's
use
right.
it. So what level of kedusha is that?
According to this interpretation, that's tchilas that's tchilas kodesh. That is the same as a kosher animal would have tchilas kodesh. That chamor has tchilas kodesh.
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
Right. So, but then the question is, if you have tchilas kodesh, tchilas kodesh by seichel should spawn kodesh. So therefore, emtza should be the next step from tchilas kodesh, and therefore you should give a chomesh on it because it is kodesh. That's the contravening view to Ravina, who wants to tie it to sof because sof is permanent. If sof is permanent, he said, then emtza, you shouldn't go with something that you can redeem. Go with something that is sof kodesh, that has permanent kedusha. So it's really how you look at kedusha, whether kedusha is tied to something that has permanent kedusha or something that originates with kedusha.
Either way, it's svara, right?
Either way, right. So, but now you have to sort of apply your mental acuity here and say what makes most sense. That's why you have a machlokes, is because Ravina says what makes sense is to tie it to the sof, and the other Mandarim is saying no, it should be tied to tchila. So this is the debate. This is the discussion that's going on here, and we're trying to understand how we should look at this. So now the Gemara is going to try to make a teretz here. Keda Omar Rava. All right. So now we're going to introduce Rava. That maybe the Rava will give us the definitive answer. And where's this answer from? The answer is from another part. Is from Shvius. What does it say there? It says over there. What is the pasuk? Let me look at the pasuk. The pasuk is okay. The pasuk is in Vayikra. Uvir aleh kohen eitzim baboker, that the kohen should put wood baboker v'orach aleha and put on it ha'ola, the ola, v'hikter aleha chel ve'eshlamim, and then he should make it as a carbon, and he should be maktir the chel ve'eshlamim. So this pasuk seems like fairly innocuous. Says, so the Gemara wants to say that we learned from ha'ola. Remember, we have been gleaning all kinds of insights from additional letters, chamishiso. Every letter in the Torah has an extreme importance. And when the Torah could say one word and says another word, we have to declare what does it mean. The Torah could have said here, Ubir aleha kohen eitzim baboker v'orech aleha ola, and to put on an ola of hikter lechel v'shlamim. It says ha'ola with the hey yediyah, which is called the definitive hey. That hey yediyah in all of Shas has extreme meaning because in most cases, I'm not even sure if there's any exclusion, the word itself without the hey makes sense. Why do you add the hey? So in any particular case, we look at what it's coming to tell us, and we infer, we take things out of that hey. So what is Rava saying? Rava says, it says in that pasuk, ha'ola, the ola. What does he mean? Ola rishona. So here, Rava is interpreting that the word ola means the ola rishona, the first Ola, Hochinami, see, so we want to say here, Hatameya, that in the case of the Behemoth Tameya, Tameya Rishona, that the first Kedusha on the Tameya, that carries a Hegdish, that you have to redeem, right? But not anything further. So what is Rava telling us? Rava is telling us that I want to learn from a different circumstance where the Torah is telling us ha'ola, and it means the first, that I'm going to draw an inference in our situation by Behemoth Tameya, also the first. In other words, if the first applies to the Ola, it should also apply to the Behemoth Tameya. And what does he mean to say? That it should be exclusively like Ravina, that the Kedusha is only on the first, just like the Kedusha by Ha'ola is on the first. We're going to extrapolate that the Kedusha by the Behema, Tameya, should also be the first, because you see that it can apply to only a first and not derivatively. That's the point he wants to make. We're arguing here that if you have Kedusha Rishona, then there should automatically be derivative Kedusha to the next level, because the first level is Kodesh. He wants to show us here a situation where you bring Ha'ola and the Kedusha is only on the first and not on anything beyond that. Therefore, Behemoth Tameya should be the same. So that's what Rava wants to define. And he says that Hatameya, when it says it says Behema Hatameya with the hey. Again, we have the same hey, that it also refers to Tameya Rishona, to the first Tameya, right? That's what you have to deconsecrate, and not anything else. So again, you see how the Gemara operates and extrapolates what we can't otherwise understand. I mean, how do we approach this? It says Ola here. It says Hatameya here, just like the Hey by Ola means only the first. The Hey by Tameya means only the first. That's how Rava is, because Rava had the insight, the seichel. But so that's how we interpret it. Who is that like? That's like Ravina. Therefore, Kedusha doesn't derive from the first. It goes to the Sof Kedusha, to where you have permanent Kedusha. That's why Ravina says you don't redeem a Chomish on a Chomish, just like you don't by Sof, you don't by Emtza. The other Mander Amrim, obviously, I don't know what they hold their hat on. I mean, they're arguing that Tchilas Kedusha, but we're saying here the Rav is giving us a definitive answer that what? That Kedusha here refers to only to the first. And he does it from Ha'ola. Okay. Tanya Kivasa Reb Shiur ben Levi. So now going back to the edict of Reb Shiur ben Levi that only the first requires a chomesh and not anything else. That's what spawned this whole argument. Okay. And we're going to bring a raya. Tanya Kivasa Reb Shiur ben Levi. Okay. The Brisa was taught like Reb Shiur ben Levi. What does it say? Parazu tachas para shel hegdish. That if someone replaces one para, one cow, with a para shel hegdish, or talis zu tachas talis shel hegdish, there's a different circumstance, but this is what the Brisa says. If someone replaces one para, we're talking about a kosher animal, one para with another para, or talis zu tachas talis shel hegdish, or there was a talis shel hegdish and he wanted to take it out and he replaced it with another talis, then Hegdish Podui, then the Hegdish is acceptable. In other words, you can do that. Okay, it does work. But beyond Hegdish al ha'elyona, Hegdish always has sort of first claim. What does that mean? What it means is that if you make an equal exchange between a para and a para and a talis and a para, no problem. But let's say the para or the talis that you want to use for the exchange is more expensive than the para or talis that you're taking out of Hegdish. In other words, the para, the talis out of Hegdish is worth, let's say, a sela. The para or the Hegdish or the talis that you want to replace it with is worth 1.5 sela or 2 sela. Then Hegdish al ha'elyona, you're exchanging the item regardless of the price, and you can't say to Hekdesh, give me the change because I'm giving you a selah and a half and it's only a selah. You're replacing it with something, that something becomes Kodesh regardless. Now, Hekdesh al Yona also means that if the second talis or the second para is worth less than the first, you have to ante up the difference. In other words, if the first one was worth a selah and the second was worth a half a selah, but I'm replacing one item for another item, Hegdish ala Yona means you've got to supplement Hegdish with another half a selah because it was worth less. On the other hand, if it's worth more, Hegdish absorbs it, and you don't get the benefit. That's
Otherwise known as the house always wins.
The house always wins. That's Pshat Yada Hal Yona, right? That is the definition of the house always wins. Now, in contrast to that, says the Gemara, if I identify a price and I say I'm exchanging this para for a chomesh, b'chomesh, b'chamesh sloim tachas para shel hegdish. If I'm replacing a para of hegdish with a para of 5 sloim, in other words, I'm giving this para, but this para is worth only 5 sloim. So I'm identifying that that's what I want to identify. Or talazu b'chamesh sloim tachas talos shel hegdish, or I'm replacing a talos worth 5 sloim for the talos shel hegdish. Then hegdish podui, then it is redeemed, but we don't say yodo al yona. In other words, hegdish isn't always going to win. The house isn't always going to win because you've capped what you're exchanging, and you're saying, I don't know what that hegdish is worth, but I'm giving you a hegdish. I'm giving you a talos or a para of 5 sloim. That's what I want to replace it with. Hegdish is allowed to exchange it. Again, there may not have been any knowledge of what the value was, so Hegdish is willing to exchange it. And the Hegdish can't come back later and say, oh, by the way, you shorted us, so you have to give us more.
So could the Gabbai of the Hekdesh at the time say, wait a minute, you're giving me one worth 5 slime, and then you're saying that's what worth, and I agree that's what that one's worth, but this other one here was worth 10 slime. I'm not going to accept it.
Yes, he can.
Okay.
Yes, he can. In other words,
or a fat cow for a thin cow,
A fat cow, exactly, right. So al hegdish rishon mosef chomesh. So on hegdish rishon you have to add a chomesh. Al hegdish sheni, on hegdish sheni ein mosef chomesh.
So the Gabbai has so much power.
Yeah, well, we know that because we know that the Gabe. Remember, we said that if a person didn't give Chomish at the time and he delayed giving Chomish, we're not worried because with Hegdish, the Gabe Hegdish will always find you. The Gabe Hegdish are very diligent. They protect the Beis Hamikdash. They protect the integrity of the Beis Hamikdash more so than their own personal integrity for their own chayfetz, because you have a fiduciary responsibility to the Beis Hamikdash. So they're always out there looking to protect. So if something doesn't smell right, they follow up. They follow up and they say that that you have to give me the full value.
Was it okay? Just curious. Was it okay to give gifts to the shamus? The one who ran the whole Hegdish? Was he sort of put on a pedestal? Nobody can show him favors or whatever?
Absolutely. This would be, you see, the total conflict of interest-free situation is because he's paid by he's a representative of the Bedek.
But it could get a little complicated. Presumably he's probably going to be a Kohen. They're all Kohanim there.
So they all have a vested interest in
right, but what I'm saying is that there are certain matnos kahuna that you normally give to certain things are given at the base of Mikdash and they split them up among the people on that watch, etc. But there are other things. There are some of them, I think challah, I think some other things where you get to absolutely choose which Kohen.
No, that's true. You can forum shop a particular Kohen to give a particular, just like we have with Pidyon Aben. Pidyon Aben is a forum shopped privilege that you pick the Kohen that you want, so some Kohanim will have the benefit. But when a Kohen is representing the Beis Hamikdash, meaning that he doesn't have a personal interest other than what his chelik is of everything else. So he's like any Kohen there. There will be no special favor to him by what he decides. He's not going to get a couple bucks on the side for say, oh, I'll look away, I'll allow this or not. So because he's representing the Bene Kabayis, he's conflict free, because now he can say that this isn't. Who is he hurting? He's hurting all the Kohanim if he doesn't accept it. Well, it's not hurting really. I mean, he's rejecting the exchange on behalf of all the Kohanim if he doesn't feel the exchange is fair to all of the Kohanim, not just to me as a Kohen, but to all the Kohanim. There should be a fair exchange. Therefore, he's really representing the total group of Kohanim, not just himself. So
In this function, they worked in pairs to watch each other, didn't they?
say it again. Is what, David?
In this function, they worked in pairs to watch each other.
Yes, there's always we say Gizber B'Tzedakah B'Shtayim, because this way one always watches the other. But I'm not 100% sure. Well, maybe yes. In other words, when someone came to the Bene Kabayis and wanted to discuss this transaction, do there have to be two Kohanim on the watch? I guess the answer is yes. It would always be two Kohanim on the watch who would talk to this person who's saying, I want to do a transference of kedusha from this item to that item. So the answer is yes, that there would be.
You can't give the Kohen a tip.
No
If
no
he
tips
gives you a
accepted.
favor.
No tips accepted. This is why we say Gabet Tzedakah B'Shtayim. Like you say, David, one always watches the other. So it's like you have, and we don't say that the two will conspire, because they're, it's one thing if one person has a little bit of a
Or as they say,
maybe
two people can't keep a secret.
can what?
Two people can't keep a secret.
Two people can't keep a secret, right. Right. So and anyway, Al Pishnai made him Yakim Davar. So the two we rely on two. We don't say the two will collude like one. So, but the answer is yes. So in other words, if you come to the Beis Hamikdash and you want to make this transaction, then depending on your wording, that's what allows you to make the transaction. So now the Gemara wants to conclude from this brisa that we just learned that Hegdish Rishon, that whatever has primary Hegdish, Mosif Chomish. Why? Because now you're taking this Shabbat Kedusha and you're replacing it with another matter. But when you go down the line, he says, but Al Hegdish Sheni, on the second item that you're redeeming, Amos of Chomesh, there is no Chomesh, and that's a Beferish Arayit of Shiur ben Levi. So ultimately now we have concluded that Rabbi Shiur ben Levi was correct, and we see from the Machlokes of Ravina and the other Amoraim that Rava concludes, like Ravina, that from the word ha'olah we infer the same for hatameya, that the kedusha stops with the first. The first is kodesh, but it stops there because it specifically if it wouldn't have pointed out the first specifically, maybe you could make that argument. But because it says ha'olah hatameya, that it means only the first. The hey means only the first. Yeah. That's the conclusion that the Gemara comes to. So now we've completed this whole discussion about Chomesh and Chomesh and Kedusha. We're gonna continue now in a minute. I mean, we're gonna do Rashi, but we're gonna go back to our original discussions about Ono and everything else that we digressed to talk about Maser Sheni and Kedusha and Hegdish, which for the last couple of blot we have. And the Gemara is going to conclude it with this discussion. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's see if Rashi can give us any further addition on what we've now discussed, because we've got through it pretty carefully here to understand what the pshat is. So let's look at Nun Daled Amud Beis at the bottom. All right, so Rashi tells us here All right, so remember that we were talking about, we wanted to learn it from Me'ila, and the Gemara says, no, not Me'ila Mamish, but we're translating Me'ila to mean the Chomesh. That was, again, the Gemara, the theory of the Gemara, because it didn't work with full-blown Me'ila, so we said, it's not Me'ila, we're only talking about the Chomesh. So Rashi says at the bottom here, Dilma le'inyan Chomesh ka'amris, Hach me'ila, lav me'ila mamish. We're not talking about me'ila mamish, v'lo b'hanor min ha'hegdish, and we're not talking about hanor from an hegdish, ela b'chomish ka'amar. We're only, again, it's a little bit strained, but the term me'ila here, he means only a chomesh, right? That's how he's interpreting it. Lift us hegdish ka'amar, and when you're coming to be poda hegdish, v'kar l'chomish me'ila. So we're saying that the chomesh is me'ila, not me'ila the way we know it, but the chomesh is me'ila. Mishum de me'ila nami shayach chomesh, because my me'ila there's also shayach chomesh. Ulamute hegdish sheni, ulamut is hegdish sheni also, and he's excluding hegdish sheni where there is no Me'ila for the Chomesh, because the Hekdesheni we said that there is no Kedusha by the Chomesh. So Ukid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So he wants to say that, I mean, again, at that time in the Gemara, we want to say that we're limiting it just to the Chomesh when we're discussing the question of whether or not there is secondary Kedusha. Okay, so the top of Nun Hayam and Aleph, Rashi is now going to, we already said this, but it's going to explain. Be'emtza Hegdish, Lisa, and then we introduced Tchila, Emtza, and Sof. So be'emtza hegdish, Lisa, nehid b'sof hegdish, lo mishkachas lo. We're not talking about sof hegdish, mishum delav, lo mizbeach, chazi, because we're talking about the kedusha of the mizbeach. Well, shaka bebinyan mihu behegdish sheni mishkachas lo, right? Shebetfisa tachas. So he's clarifying that we clearly aren't talking about Sof Hegdish, which has a permanence because you're giving a carbon. So this is the first time we introduced Emtza Hegdish. What we said was Chomesh, which we thought was the kind of the final, wasn't the final. It was the middle layer of what the Gemara wants to tell us. Vishe'ena b'Sof Hegdish. Because it isn't like Sof Hegdish, right? Mishum hachi imute emtza hegdish mina can mefarish v'azal. So therefore, he takes the position that we want to take out emtza as well, just like Sof. Sof Hegdish, emtza Hegdish. He brings down over here in the paren that Sof Hegdish, emtza Hegdish. All right, so he means Sof Hegdish. We're comparing Emtza to Sof. That's what he means when he says that. Ma Sof Hegdish nafkalo minei the mamayit machomesh. Just like Sof Hegdish is excluded from a chomesh. Of Emtza Hegdish, the Sof Hegdish vadai below miuta the kro nami lo shayich be chomesh. Because if there's no pasuk that allows that to happen, the whole lo porikle. Miu, ahane miuta dekro, ledamule. Emtza hegdish. In other words, you need the pasuk to be medama emtza hegdish. The belav miuta lo matzas lemema emtza hegdish kasof hegdish. In other words, without a pasuk, I would not be able to say that emtza hegdish is like sof hegdish. Why? The hasam mishum delo shaycha bechomish. Because I would have said, without a pasuk, I would have said that Sof Hegdish can't have a chomesh because it's permanent. But how would I know that I can compare it to Emtza? So he's saying that if the pasuk did not, again, I'm not sure what he's referring to, but he's saying if the pasuk didn't enumerate that or didn't distinctively say that Emtza Hegdish is like Sof Hegdish, I would not have been able to glean it myself. That's the svara of those who say that it has to go after Tchilas Hegdish. And so the Gemara could Amar Rava, Chloma Behedja Emute LeEmtza Hegdish, could Amar Rava. the Seder Yuma. No, that it's categorically clear that Emtza Hegdish is comparable to Sof and not to Tchilas Hegdish. Ha'ola, remember with the hay, the Ksiv Gabe Seder Hamarocha Ubir Aleh HaKoyen Eitzim Baboker. This is the pasuk. It's pasuk in Vayikra. Varach Aleh Ha'ola Hey Yisera Dorish. The Hey Yisera we learn Shetehu Rishona, that it should be the beginning, the first one. Shlo yeh hekter kodem l'tomet shel shachar, that it should be the first carbon. So that hay identifies number one, her first, right? So if it therefore hatameya also represents first. That's how we make that dimion. Okay, hegdish podui afapi shelo some damim kesuvim the kamelon hegdish shavamana shechil al shavapruta mechalel b'shari l'sinamine umir yad hegdish al halyoina shim damim halal. Okay, so what Rashi is saying here, hegdish podui afapi shelo some damim kesuvim. Now, even if you didn't place any specific money on this, the kamelon hegdish shava mana shechilu al shava pruta, that hegdish is shava mana. It's worth. It has the worth of he's saying it has to be at least shava pruta. Mechalel v'shori li'isyu aminei umiya yad hegdish al halyona. In other words, because it's worth a shava pruta, therefore you're allowed to make the exchange. We're going to see in the next Mishnah we talk about shava pruta a lot. In other words, the shava pruta is the minimum amount. You can't give something that's less than a shava pruta to hegdish. It has to have that minimum value. So he's saying that as long as it has that minimum value, then yad hegdish al yona she'im damim halalu yiserim al demeya hegdish. If the value of what you're exchanging is more than what's in hegdish, kana hegdish v'im hegdish yeser aleihem Shalom al karcha. And conversely, if what was in hegdish is more valuable than what you're exchanging, you have to pay the difference. That's pshat yoda al alyona, right? The hegdish always has the upper hand. Halasu b'chamesh shloim hegdish podi afapi she'ena shave. Even though it's not comparable in value, below tema we don't say hoel v'sam lo damim. Ve'ena shava kamosha ama ein dvarav klum ela hegdish podui v'hi yishalem. In other words, even though you would ask, well, okay, so it's not worth the same amount, don't we infer automatically that he should have to pay the value of that first hegdish? Again, afapisha ein shava, even though it's not comparable. V'lo tema, and you don't ask, hol v'sam lo damim. The Eina Shava Kamosha Ama Ein Devar of Klum. We don't say that it's null and void. Ela Hegdish Podi V'hu Yishalim. So Hegdish is Poda. In other words, the question is, if it isn't worth the value of what's in Hegdish, can you nullify the whole thing? Answer is no. You don't nullify it. You make him pay the difference. In other words, when he says, I want to exchange one for the other, and it turns out that what's in Hegdish is more valuable, then he can say, I'm backing out because I didn't mean to have to give any extra money. Says Rashi, no, you can't back out. Ein devar of klum, ela hegdish podi v'hu yishalem. It is hegdish when you make that exchange, and you have to pay the difference. He's kind of boxed himself in because he wants it to be exchanged, but he doesn't want to pay the difference. So Rashi's telling us no, that the gizbar, again, going back to the Gabei Tzedakah, the Gabei Tzedakah can make him pay the difference. Okay, al hegdish sheni im chaza opada as that
Sort of too late that he should have negotiated.
he should have negotiated exactly. So because he made the exchange, and it turns out that the gizbar says, "Wait a minute, I'm evaluating what I have as being more than what you're giving me." He says, "Oh no, then cancel." You can't cancel at that point. You've already committed it to hegdish. and therefore it is Hagdish. The exchange is made, and once again we see, as we said before, David, that the Gizbor Hagdish can now go out and collect, because he's collecting on behalf of Bedek Abayis. The integrity of the kedusha of the item requires that he get that money.
There's two phases. The minute you say I'm giving this to Hegdish, it's done.
It's done.
Hegdish. Now the question.
Now we're going to do the evaluation, right?
Evaluations and the money and other.
And if it turns out it matches up, okay. And if it doesn't match up,
technical matters are a second phase.
Right.
So there's a complication here, which there's sort of gloss over, which is, I'll use example today, used cars. The same used car will have multiple prices. They'll have one price of what a used car dealer would pay you. There's another value might be higher, what they would take it as a trade-in, because they're going to make more money elsewhere. Right. There's another value if you walked onto the lot and said, I want to buy that car, you'd be paying a higher price. So there's, even though it's the exact same car, it's sort of wholesale retail, but even more complicated than that. And so a lot of this is predicated on everybody basically agreeing this is the worth of this item.
Except in your example, if you can possibly renege, then the deal is off. By Hagdish, you can't renege. So having made the commitment, like Jay said, now the second phase kicks in. But remember, it kicks in only if the Bedek Habayis is worth more. What's in the Bedek Habayis is worth more than the object that you're
right. But I'm saying, use it as an example. You make Hagdish a used car, and
right,
you're thinking it's it's worth it's worth $2,000, but if you sold it to a dealer, let's say, and the Hagdish might turn around, you want to now say, oh, you know what, I think I want to keep the car after all. I want to go ahead and exchange it and pay the value, and the Bedek Habayis could say, well, this car on the open market is worth $2,500, and now you're thinking, there could be these kinds of conflicts. It may not happen as much with a live animal or whatever, or a talus, but there could still be it could get tricky sometimes.
It could get tricky, right? But the key is that on the flip side, if what you're giving is worth more than the Hagdish, and you've identified 5 sloim, then you're not mechuyev to pay. The Bedek Habayis doesn't have the Yoda al Yona because you've specified. If you don't specify, it's Yoda al Yona. But once you specify, it works only one way. The Bedek Habayis never loses, but they can't get the windfall of the higher priced exchange that they have to acknowledge or somehow make good to the person donating, because he said, I only want to donate 5 sloim. I don't want to donate 10 sloim if that's what it's worth. So that's a very interesting point. And so at the end of the day, again, there's no Beis Hamikdash, but when you look at it from the standpoint of what would be the case, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is the definitive author, and he says that there's only Hagdish Rishon, and not, so for sure not, but even Emtza, what we call the secondary Emtza, there's also not, because it's only from the pasuk Ha'olah Hatameya. That's what we hang our hat on, that it's only the first and not anything after that. So that's the end of this sugya. And next week we're going to pick up again on back where we were with a couple of twists. We're going to see how the Mishnah goes weiter. But now we're back to what we were talking about originally in Bava Metzia, not about Hagdish and Kodesh, but about the actual source of Ono and Chom and everything else.